Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with one of our donation decks of the week, the Master Transcendent. This is a second part of a two-part kind of project from Kaibor, who was looking between the Master Transcendent and, the Wise Mothman, two Fallout kind of Sultai commanders that have like a milling theme to them. And they wanted to know which one of the two was better, looking at both decks, looking at both commanders. And so on this episode, we're going to be looking at the Master. If you want to look at the one with the Wise Mothman, that was last week. And I'm not going to bury the lead right now. Between the two of them, I would say the Wise Mothman is probably the better of the two. But it's still worth looking at the Master Transcendent, taking a look, see what works, what doesn't work, and why this deck, like what does it do and how could we improve it, even if, for those who want this commander over the Mothman. Alright, thank you so much for sending the deck, Kaibor, and let's get right into it. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is the Master Transcendent, and why are they our kind of mill reanimator, which usually goes together a lot easier than you think, but very specifically mill reanimator commander? They're a 4-mana 2/4 legendary artifact creature mutant. In 1 black, green, blue, that's the Sultai. They have 2 abilities. The first one is when the Master Transcendent enters the battlefield, target player gets 2 rad counters. And then they have an ability that is tap, put target creature card in a graveyard that was milled this turn onto the battlefield under your control. It's a green mutant with base power and toughness 3 and 3. It loses other colors and creature types. Okay, that's a mouthful. So basically the way the Master Transcendent works is that by tapping them, you can reanimate a creature that was milled this turn. It doesn't have to be from your deck. Most likely it will be, but it can be from your opponent's decks as well. And instead of the creature coming out, as what it is, it's a 3/3 green mutant. Now, Kaibor had mentioned like what's useful to make into a 3/3 mutant, and we're going to be coming back to that all the way at the end. That's like the last thing we're going to touch on. But right now, we just need to focus on the reanimation. I didn't put aside the rad counters this time, but I'll try to repeat them from memory. Rad counters are tokens that you give to players, and basically on their upkeep, they mill that many. And if they mill a non-land card, they lose a life and they remove a rad counter for themselves. So right off the bat, going back here, and we can take a look at the Wise Mothman. One of the big downsides in comparison to the Mothman is the Mothman gives it to all players and has it on ETB and attack, like a Titan, right? And that's just so much more reliable than the Master, who can only do it on enter the battlefield. Now, your opponent gets 2 rad or it doesn't have to be an opponent, the player gets 2 rad counters, which is better, but they're pretty easy to heal off. The second they mill non-creatures, non-land, and if they're creatures, that's what you want, they will go away, so they don't last very, very long. So looking at the deck, this deck has been kind of built to alleviate a lot of the problems that the Master has. And some of the ways to do so I agree with, and some of them I don't think work as well. Going down here, the first thing, as we always do, let's take a look at the curve. And I think the curve is kind of the example of what the problem kind of is. Like, we're very, very chunky, plateauy 1, 2, 3, and then we kind of trail off. Now, a level of this trailing off is normal when it comes to reanimation decks, but you will note that usually reanimation decks kind of go a lot further. They go up to 10, and a lot of these piles are a little lower, like, with 1 or 2 creatures, which is kind of what we have here. But we can also see we have a lot of 5 drops, we have a few 4 drops, and we have a ton of 3 drops, especially in enchantments. This is also interesting, all these enchantments, because they somewhat work with us, but they don't always work with us. But let's come back to that in a second. This curve is just a little clunky to me. It shows us that we're very much so focused on our early game, and especially our game plan of putting the Master Transcendent out, and perhaps we're too reliant on our commander. looking at the deck proper, I want to start off by talking about basically the artifact area, because I think this is where we have the most, not problems, but the most work we can do, right? After that, I think it'll be enchantments, but with artifacts, there is this kind of theme to them. We have a bunch of mana rocks, and then we have a bunch of cards that are meant to work with the master specifically. So something like Altar of the Brood is not as bad, because this is just a general mill card that we can use with our reanimation plan with or without the master. But things like Manifold Key, things like Unwinding Clock, those specifically are meant to be used with the master. Now, Unwinding Clock can untap the One Ring, or it can untap, obviously, Manifold Key or 1,000-Year Elixir, but that feels a little clunky if you ask me. It doesn't have the same power as like Tyvar. Tyvar works really, really well here because both his static and his activated abilities are all just very much so on theme for this deck. So this is perfect. But the other ones here, Manifold Key, we have the Greaves, Sting even, right? Swiftfoot Boots for protection, same with Light, yeah. It feels a little too clunky. It's putting too many of our eggs in one basket, and at the same time, it's slowing us down. It's not free to be casting out Lightning Greaves or Swiftfoot Boots, especially the Boots, because you need additional mana to equip it. At least Lightning Greaves represents that once the master comes out, you can immediately equip it, use that ability. But, as you might know, that's actually better in theory than in practice. Lightning Greaves is a pretty bad haste enabler for 4-mana creatures. As you would know if you sit down and math it out, there's not really a good time to be doing it. Lightning Greaves comes out on turn 2, which is the turn you want to play a mana rock or ramp to ensure that your commander comes out on turn 3. So by putting Lightning Greaves instead, we've kind of delayed the entire process by a turn. So then let's say you go turn 2 Lightning Greaves, turn 3 Mana Rock, turn 4 Commander. You don't really need to do that, but the Mana Rock at least allows you to use it like Swiftfoot Boots instead, because you'd need that extra mana. But in both those scenarios, you have your Hasty Commander on turn 4, but if you had just played the Mana Rock and your Commander on turn 3, on turn 4 you'd be untapping with them anyways, right? So it feels like, you know, these pieces aren't meshing as well together. So I would really like to take these out. I'd both like to take out the Manifold Key, I'd like to take out both Boots, I'd like to take out Unwinding Clock. 1,000-Year Elixir I think is just stronger, and I think has more of an upside, so I'm fine with it. But the rest I think that I've named, I think I definitely want to take out. Then when it comes to Mana Rocks, I feel like we've got too many. We've got 3 Talismans, we've got the Felwar Stone, and the Arcane Signet. And when I say we have too many, I guess I should be more specific. I want them to be non-permanents. I would like them to be like Farseek and the rest, and I think I put 3 visits in my additions, and I guess I didn't need to because I'm talking about it now, but I'd prefer if we could play 3 visits, Rampant Growth, Farseek, the other ones at 2 mana, and maybe even 1 3-mana one, because I think I would much rather the land being pulled out of the deck. And it's twofold reasons. The first thing is that these talismans, when milled over, don't do anything for our deck, right? Now, obviously, when the ramp gets milled over, it's the same thing, but these are permanents. We don't have any permanent reanimation, so it's almost a little worse. Whereas things like Farseek and the other ramp cards, they additionally pull an extra land out. As you might have seen in my April Fool's Day, video, I talk about like thinning the deck. And that's not as real in Commander as it is in like 60 card formats where you play tons and fetches. Like when I play like Modern, and of my like 20 lands, 8 of them are fetch lands, the thinning of the deck is actually very, very relevant. However, here it's usually not as much. But the caveat is if we're going to see a large portion of our deck, and if you consider milling as seeing an extra card, because like traditionally when we think about thinning, we think about, well, if you draw 5 cards and you thin lands out, there's a less chance of drawing a land. But we usually don't think of that as a realistic thing because it's rare you're drawing 5 cards or 5 cards repeatedly. However, it's incredibly common to be milling yourself 5 cards repeatedly. If we can see Hedron Crab and Ruin Crab, though Ruin Crab only hits your opponents, you can, with Hedron Crab, you can repeatedly mill yourself. And if you start thinking about how many lands that will see, the thinning does matter. So with that in mind, I would like to play the ramp over the talismans. Before we go to enchantments, I do want to note on Ruin Crab, and generally the idea that I think we should be milling ourselves primarily and our opponent's secondary, and Ruin Crab notably cannot do that. I don't think that stops me from playing Ruin Crab, but it's something I think that's worth considering, because with Ruin Crab out, if you don't have self-mill, you're really hoping you get some good stuff off your opponents. And there's going to be certain pods or certain situations where you're just not going to be getting that, whereas with Hedron Crab, you can guarantee getting good creatures because you know what's in your deck. Mind you, we're very low on creatures, and my additions will try to make that a little better, but I just wanted to note on that. All right. Looking at our enchantments, we have a bit of a sub-theme of discard. And though I generally like this kind of sub-theme, Necrogen Mists, Oppression, Bottomless Pit, and in this as a optional in the side, we have Painful Quandary, we have Lily of the Veil. This is a collection that I really like, but in this current setup, I do not. One of the things Kaibuer wasn't sure about is how much reanimation they wanted to play. And I'm going to just solve that really, really quickly. If you want to play these discard cards, you need to be playing more reanimation. These cards are very good, but none of them trigger your commander. None of them are mill effects. So therefore, you cannot naturally reanimate these cards, and you're going to be losing some cards you'd like to reanimate. Or you're going to be purposely discarding cards you want to reanimate. And since your commander doesn't work with that in mind, I think we should just be playing some reanimation cards. Obviously, I will be at least saying one in the additions, but if you were thinking reanimate, animate dead, even, what is it, Dance with the Dead, I think was just reprinted, or was that it was Necromancy that was just reprinted. These are just easy to place in the deck, they have really high ceilings, and I think they're just worth running. Even then, do you want to play these cards? I'm not sure. They feel kind of, is ancillary the word? They feel like they're not directly connected to the deck, because our deck isn't an oppressive deck. You know, you don't have a ton of removal. You're not trying to control the situation with all, like, the board for all your opponents. You don't have any sacrifice effects. You don't have any other ways to pressure them. Like, the main thing is you're trying to get their creatures from them, or your own creatures from the graveyard. And like I said, the discard doesn't help without other reanimation spells, but it also doesn't, like, set you up for it, right? It kind of, like, it annoys your opponents while you kind of, how do I put this? You kind of commit to these enchantments on the board, and we don't have board clears even, right? So all it does is incentivize 3 of your opponents to start targeting you really, really quickly and really hard, right? As they realize they're going to start losing tons of cards, it becomes a lot more convenient to just knock you out of the game. And without things like, you know, we aren't playing Propaganda, we aren't playing any board clears, we're not playing Toxic Deluge would be the one I'd be playing. Without those around, we're kind of just a sitting duck when we get into this side of the game. And then the other side is, if we're working towards this reanimation plan and we've succeeded and we've reanimated some cards, now what? Like, why are we casting Bottomless Pit? We're already ahead, right? We're already trying to win the game. This is just not the card that lets us go further. Like, the difference between the reanimation plan and, like, Sheoldred over here, or Sheoldred Whispering one over here, like, it's just kind of night and day. So I think you should kind of commit to one and go in that direction. Something else I did want to note, because it is here, we do have Mercfiend Liege. I do think it's nice that the mutants you make will become 4/4s, and they will untap, but I don't think it's worth playing a 5-mana creature for that. I get, once again, this untaps our commander, but, like, this doesn't work as well as we want it to. Like, think about it like this. Like, you need to have repeatable, like, you need this to be working with Dreamborn Muse. You need repeatable, triggered mill that happens on every other turn, because the master only cares like one turn at a time, right? So if you have the master and then it's on your side and you mill with Hedron Crab and you reanimate something and then you untap the master on your opponent's untap step, you need a second way to mill them. You need like a fetch land or something, right? Because otherwise untapping the master isn't going to do anything. But here's the thing. You might say, okay, so I have Hedron Crab, or Ruin Crab or anything, and I have a fetch land, so we're good. On my next opponent's turn, I'm going to mill them. When the master untaps, we'll get another trigger. Okay, what about the next one, right? Like, what about Seaborn Muse, actually both Seaborn Muse and Murphine Liege will untap it again. Are you going to be able to mill them again after that? And like a lot of things that feel cool don't work, like don't fix that. Like Zelix is nice because it's a mana sink and you can works really well with Seaborn Muse, but Altar of the Brood doesn't work well, for example, because the creature you put in play will mill your opponents, but then you have to wait another turn. Do you see what I'm saying? I feel like I'm getting too much in the weeds of this, but like this feels like it's not a nombo, it's like it's like two ships in the night bow. Like these two ideas feel really, really synergistic and they feel like they're gonna like do well together, but at the last second they just kind of pass each other and they don't really connect. Meanwhile, on the other side, like Seaborn Muse, I'm a lot more fine with it because the ceiling on Seaborn Muse is much, much higher, right? So like, even though it's a 5 mana 2/4, that only tangentially really works with your commander, the fact that it turns on all your instants on all your opponent's turns is just, and like Deathrite Shaman and the like, much, much better, right? Okay. I think that's generally the things I want to pick on. Kindred Discovery is going to be the last thing I think I'll say. I think this is very win more. You put this, you name mutant. Wait, what's our win more test? Let's do the win more test. When is this card good? It is not good when you're behind. It's okay in neutral. It's really good when your deck is functioning, and it's fantastic and or only functional sometimes with your commander out. When you are very much in those last two categories and not the first two, you are win more. And for a deck like this, I think Kindred Discovery is very, very much so win more. Think about the decks you see Kindred Discovery in. Kindred Discovery is like the top of a curve in like a bird deck or like a merfolk deck, right? A deck that runs like 30 to 40 sometimes. Let's say like 35 creatures of the same type, including a commander of the same type. Whereas here we can see we have 15 creatures, and we have 1, 2, 3. We have 3 creatures outside of our commander that are of the correct type. Let's go into subtype for a second because I want to see if there's any others. There's 2 spirits. There's 3 crabs. That's pretty funny. I do like that. There's 3 crabs, 2 horrors, and 3 mutants. And 2, I said the spirits already, sorry. So with that in mind, I really don't think that's worth it. I think this feels like it's just kind of really clunky. And even in like a different build that goes really hard into mutants, I still probably wouldn't play this card. It just doesn't feel like the right thing. All right, with that in mind, let's go into additions. Here's 3 visits. Like I said, I think you should play a few more of the 2-mana ones. 3 visits. You can play Rampant Growth. I'm sure there's always one more that looks for a forest. I can never... Nature's Lore, right? It's Nature's Lore. Let me remind myself. Yeah, Nature's Lore. So definitely 3 visits, Nature's Lore, and then if you want Rampant Growth. But I think there's also an argument to be made you could play the first Cultivate or Kodama's Reach, because with that in mind, like your deck can want to... your deck can want to cast these like reanimation targets, and that does really help. It thins the deck, especially Cultivating Kodama's Reach, pull 2 out. I don't know to what degree I would, but like I don't think it would be incorrect to play the first one. Moving on, I wanted to find some more mill things, and especially speaking of something to do with the land in your graveyard, Aftermath Analyst is a card that I'm very, very impressed by. I think this is a very, very good card, and I think especially in this deck, because not only is it a fantastic like self-mill engine on ETB, the fact that it sticks around to do a splendid reclamation is just really, really good. This works fantastically with both like, you know, holding up mana or using one of your cards that like untaps your lands, like Seaborn Muse. But once you get to a certain point that you've milled enough of your deck, this is just a huge swing in mana power, right? And then from that point on, you don't need to worry about reanimating these creatures. You're just going to have the mana for it. This is a card that very much so impresses me, and I think this should definitely be in there. Next is a section of cards that I don't know what to... I'm going to say these are like backups to our commander. First one is Raoul. It's Raoul, right? Yeah. Troubleshooter. So this guy is surprisingly missing because I believe he comes in the... He must come in the regular deck. There's too much like on theme, right? Once on each of your turns, you can cast a spell from among cards in your graveyard that were milled this turn. Very, very similar to a commander. And then of course, each player mills a card. Now, of course, a spell means we can recast our, our creatures, any spells, and especially the fact that we're really low on mana right now. This card is really good for that exact reason. This is the situation where we can get very, very far by just casting a Hedron Crab or something. Now, it's just mill 1, but I think it just works in theme so much with everything that's going on. It happens to be a mutant as well. I think you'll be very, very happy with it. The next one is Muldrotha. Muldrotha, I feel like this is the top end I want in your deck. So Muldrotha is fantastic here because a lot of what makes Muldrotha kind of bad can be negated in this deck. Muldrotha is just a really clunky card sometimes because she's 6 mana. She's a 6 mana 6/6. I don't like her as a commander because of how much mana she costs. However, as a card that you're going to reanimate, even as a 3/3, she's fantastic. She gives you something to do with all the lands, all the enchantments and artifacts that you put in there, and the smaller creatures, you just get to cast them out of your graveyard. So I like this both as a payoff and also like a backup, that if you kind of run out of gas and you get to like 6-7 mana, just cast Muldrotha and just start digging out of your graveyard. So I think this should be the top end of the deck. Breach the Multiverse, I think should be like the finisher card, but this is like a close second. This is just so intrinsically like connected to how the deck works that I think this should really be in there for sure. And I wish it was cheaper. I'm really surprised how expensive this card is. I think I picked it up for like $5 at one point, and I still haven't done anything with her, but fantastic card, and I think this is a really good place for her. Kagha Shadow Archdruid also feels very similar, but a little weaker than the first two. Whenever she attacks, you mill 2, so she's got a mill trigger attached. But the other thing is, once each turn, you may play a land or cast a permanent spell from among the cards in your graveyard that were put there from your library this turn. Really similar to Raoul. Somewhat similar to our commander, just a little rougher, at 4 mana, it's only permanent. At least you can play the land as well. But it's just a little worse, but I still think I would play her. Like, I think it's still worth it just to have another copy of this ability. The kind of problem is like, okay, if you have all of these, I think the next step is to really work on the mana. Because I think once you get there, you're going to have like so many triggers going off and so much to do with that. Like you're going to have like 5-6 cards go in, and you're going to have the ability to play like 3 or 4 of them and reanimate one of them or something like that. And with that in mind, I think mana is going to be the thing that's holding you back. Still, I think Kagha's pretty free to play, and I think you should in this kind of deck because once again, just another card that works with the commander so well. The last one I think that works very similar to the deck is Gyruda. This one really caught my eye, mainly because we have an even costed commander. Now, it's a completely different build to make Gyruda the companion, but there is something to be said here. I think the main thing I like is that Gyruda has been errated to mill, so don't worry about that. But when you mill Gyruda and then reanimate Gyruda, you get another trigger. And that works as just like a really good target off of your commander, but sometimes this is just fine as a creature that you just cast for 6 mana, mill everyone, and have like a really good card like the Archon come into play. I will note that you do have to kind of keep it in mind, like what your CMC is in your deck, and if you don't have the right numbers, this gets worse. So for example, something I forgot to suggest, but Duskmangler is a really, really powerful like pseudo Archon that hits all of your opponents. This card is in every black Reanimator deck that I have because of its sheer power. But I will note it's 7 mana, so it's odd, so it can't be reanimated by Garuda. Still, I'd be amiss not to suggest it, so as I remember it right now, this should also be in there if you want to reanimate something. Because once again, this creature, you don't care if it's a 3/3. It's not a problem, it's a 3/3. You just want that ETB without paying the cost. Though I will say, if you get to the, something I have noticed is when you get to that point, like at 7 mana where you can just cast this card, this price is really not that bad, and sometimes, especially with sacrifice or discard, can kind of enable it. So like I've used this to on cast sacrifice a creature that I want to reanimate later, like to get another trigger, such as Gary or Grey Merchant of Asphodel. So even though this is a downside and you want to reanimate it just to get that second ability, this is still good enough, I think. And I'm wondering if I should put this in my Blink deck, because I think it's even good enough there. Something to consider. But this is definitely something I think you can put in as just another target that when you hit and make a 3/3, you get incredibly far ahead. Not in here, but something I think is a much stronger 5-drop is Sir Conrad. This is like, I don't know to what degree I love this. I think if you lean more, like, okay, in the current build with a lot of discard and like the oppression and that whole collection, Sir Conrad fits in perfectly. However, if you move away from that, Sir Conrad feels a little cuter, but he's a great mana sink. He's going to do a lot of damage, so generally I think he's good enough. But you'll have to kind of see to what degree you like it. This is the kind of card that you love to reanimate, and then you hope to mill like 10 cards from like using like, I don't know, Hedron Crab into Cultivate into like a fetch land and immediately do so much damage to all, and not even Hedron Crab, it should be Ruin Crab, right? And just like deal so much damage to all your opponents. But if the build doesn't support it, which it might not, I don't like this as much. I still wanted to put him in here. I still wanted to mention him because he's just such a powerful card, and he's been reprinted, so it continues to be $1. But there is kind of a ceiling to this, and as you pull the discard cards out, he hits that ceiling a bit faster. For Reanimation, I think I go to jail if I don't speak of Life and Death in every black-green deck that could reanimate. But here we are, Life and Death. Very, very good cards. Obviously, for those who haven't seen, I'll do the spiel, which is Death is 2 mana reanimate from your own graveyard. And this is a 20-cent card, and Reanimate is like a $10 card. So some people, for budgets, I would play Life and Death every time I could over Reanimate. For those who don't have budget and a deck like this, I'd probably play both. This is like a copy of Animate Dead, except for, you don't lose the creature if Animate Dead goes away, and it only reanimates from your own side, but it's still a very, very good card. So, always something that's missing. Then, we have one more before we go into the thing I wanted to end on. So, Seed of Hope is another mill card that I think is very, very interesting. This has kind of caught my eye as a card that I want to test in more formats and play around with, but this is definitely the place that I think it's good. Because I think this card has just got a really nice floor, right? You mill 2 cards, and then you put one of them back into your hand if one of them's a permanent. And I think generally, in most cases, you're fine just casting this for green. And just without your commander out, maybe turn 1, maybe just when you have extra mana, and just get a little value by digging a little deeper and seeing what you might get. However, when your commander is out, this card gets a lot better, right? This becomes a pick 2, reanimate 1, keep the other, if you hit 2 permanents. Something worth considering is that you have a high mana of instant sorceries, so if you want Seed of Hope to be good, you have to keep that in mind. But as it is, I think the floor on this card is really, really good. It's that nice win more where this is good when you're behind, this is good when you're at neutral. It's okay when you're ahead, but when your commander's out, it's really, really good. And that's 3 of 4, and I do really like that. It's definitely, I will say it needs testing. Definitely the numbers of the deck in permanent to non-permanent needs to be considered, but it's a card I really, really like. I think sometimes you're just going to shoot really, really, you're going to just, what do they say, run hot with it? I don't know the lingo. You're just going to do really well with this card, and you're going to be really impressed with how it works. All right, so way at the start of the episode, I said that Kyber was asking that the Master Transcendent brings back creatures as 3/3s. Is there something we can do with that? And outside of reanimating cards, you know, where you don't care about their power and toughness, there is one group of creatures that I think this works the best with. And that's Infect, right? Infect is a place where the power of the creature is generally smaller than 3/3, and they get dramatically stronger as their power goes up. The other thing that makes me think of this is that black, blue, green, Sultai is the color for Infect. Because I think we have the color combination. We have the most creatures in these colors that are playable, and I think there's just a really, really nice collection of them that you can use. Now, at a certain point, they do get a little weaker, like Phyrexian Vat Mother isn't one you want to reanimate. Let's see, Phyrexian Hydra as well, Putrefax, but Skitharix as well. But the rest of them, the ones that are smaller than this, especially the ones that are really like low to the ground, are really, like, I'm thinking of like Blighted Agent and Glistener Elf. These are the ones you want to reanimate. You're basically tripling how strong they are, and you get to get away with the fact that, like, you know, you got a pretty good creature out of them that's a huge threat to your opponents. They now represent about 4 hits, and that's only assuming you attack with one of them at a time. The second you have 2 of them, that's 2 attacks guaranteeing an opponent out. That's very, very scary. I will note that even some of them, if you grow them by 1, is good enough. Phyrexian Crusader is such a strong creature, and making Phyrexian Crusader a 3/3 is dramatically better. First Strike Infect or First Strike Wither is just so powerful and can allow this creature to just attack with impunity into the most ridiculous boards. And that's really, really good. Now, that being said, there's only so many of these Infect creatures. Some of them, such as, where are they? Carrion Call, can't be reanimated because they're tokens, so they don't even count. So even with the numbers that we have, we're looking at, I guess the numbers at the top. It says 58. I'm going to be generous and say we probably have about 30 playable cards. And though that's most of a creature, you know, base, I don't know if it's enough. And I would probably want to support them with +1/+1 counters. Kyber even said that, you know, you could be increasing these with +1/+1 counters, and I would say, if you wanted to make this into kind of a weird Infect Reanimator deck, where you've got, you know, these creatures coming out, you make them into 3/3s, you put a few +1/+1 counters, you use Proliferate on both the Infect hits, and otherwise, I think it would be pretty good. I just don't think it's the build now, so that would be a separate deck to build. It does catch my eye, though. That's something I think no one will see coming when you put the Master Transcendent out. And with that, I think that's the end of my suggestions. I think this deck is not bad. You know, like, don't get me wrong, I started this video by saying that the Wise Mothman is just so much better, but that's not to say the Master Transcendent is bad. It's more like a compliment towards the Mothman. You know, the Mothman is just a very, very pushed card with a lot of abilities that work really well together. And the Master Transcendent, though very cool lore-wise, and weirdly enough, another creature called the Master, even though it's not from Doctor Who, this card is just like, it struggles to be where it wants to be. In the 99, I think I really like this creature, but as the commander, I feel like we kind of really have to work to make it happen. And if we were building the Master Transcendent Infect, I would be behind that work, you know? I would be pretty happy with doing that work because the payoff is really good, and you have a really unique deck that works very, very strangely, and I think that's really cool. But if we're playing just kind of Sultai Reanimate, I think the Master Transcendent kind of loses its edge there. Yeah, and it's too bad, but, like, you know, this is what happens. If you have a, you know, lower power group, or like groups that like to do more fun things than just try to be strong, have strong decks, that's not a bad thing. I think the Master Transcendent will do very, very well there. But between the two of them, for me, the Wise Mothman is just absolutely the superior creature. And look at that art. Ah, it catches my eye so well. What a card. All right, with that in mind, good luck with deck creation, and I hope you have fun. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.